What's going on? Welcome into another edition of In the Game. Matt Miguez here, talking all things New Orleans Saints today. As look, we're here in late May, and typically there's not a lot to get to, especially after a 5-12 season. But the Saints have been making headlines, no doubt, over the last month or so. So here to break that down with us is Chris Rosvoglou. He is the host of the Straight Up Saints podcast, which you can catch on Boot Crew Media. He's also a writer for The Spun. Chris, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start, let's go back to the draft. The Saints had 9 picks in this year's NFL draft, didn't trade away a single one of them, and didn't try to trade up. Mickey didn't do his, aggressiveness, let's climb up to go get somebody. They stayed put, made some really smart decisions, starting with Kelvin Banks at number 9 overall to kind of shore up that offensive line. Take me through, your thoughts on the 9 picks of this year's draft class.
Yeah, look, I mean, the first thing you kind of mentioned that shocked me was the lack of just a trade, because usually even if the Saints don't make one, we find out splash reports like a day, 2 days later about who they were targeting. And, the only thing Mickey really said was they wanted a receiver, but every time they wanted to get a guy on their board, he got taken a couple picks before them. So overall, I know the number 9, getting Kelvin Banks number 9 overall is not like the flashiest pick for Saints fans. And I totally get it, but if you tell me that in the next 5 to 7 years, the Saints are going to have their bookend tackles in Banks and Fuaga, sign me up for that, because I think you can build the identity of your football team off having a great offensive line. And I look at the Eagles last year. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is a great player. Saquon's a great player. Same goes for A.J. Brown. But the O-line is really what sets the tone. And bringing in Kellen Moore, from a talent perspective, you got a lot there. So, I really like that pick. I know Tyler Shuck is the one that everyone's going to talk about the most, and he's by far the most polarizing pick. But look, I don't hate the idea of taking a shot on him, and especially if he starts all 17 games this year, because I'd love for the Saints to get some clarity as to what he can be. But I'll tell you this, Matt, the pick to me that stood out the most, and maybe this is me just falling in love with the player's tape too much, I really like Jonas Sanker from Virginia. I think he's the type of player who's really savvy, and you go watch what he did at college. It seems like he was always cleaning up everyone else's mess. And you pair him with guys like Justin Reed, Tyrann Mathieu, you're probably not cleaning up as many messes there. So I'm excited for him in this Saints team.
Also really excited to see what Quincy Riley, the cornerback out of Louisville, can do. He had a really good college career. Obviously has somewhat of a chemistry with Tyler Shuck already, being teammates at Louisville. Really interested to see how he kind of carves out a spot in that defensive backfield. Speaking of that defensive backfield, Asante Samuel Jr. is on the market. He came visit with the Saints. Obviously, there's a medical issue there, right? Samuel coming off of a neck injury. Where do you think that's at? How close do you think the Saints are to maybe signing him?
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I can't, say for certain is I don't know how those medicals are looking, but I do believe if the Saints feel comfortable, then they're going to do what they can to get him, because I think for them, they're not exactly, I don't want to say pleased is the word, but they're not in love with their cornerback room at the moment. And the reason being is there's a lot of unknowns, right? Is Kool-Aid McKinstry good enough to be an impact player? He could be, but we don't know. Like, the sample size is too small, and you're now learning from a new system. Alontae Taylor is the type of player who, beginning of last season, I would say he was the guy that his stock went up the most. He was tremendous, and then once you start reshuffling and Adebo goes down and Lattimore gets traded and he's on the outside, he struggled. And if you're New Orleans, if you can go out there and get Asante Samuel Jr. and play him and maybe Kool-Aid McKinstry on the outside and have that guy in Alontae Taylor where you can move him all over the field, I feel like that probably serves him best. And on top of that, you mentioned Quincy Riley. You don't have to rush his development. And when he's ready to go, and I believe he'll be ready to go as long as his ankle's okay, because there's been some concerns regarding his status there, then you have some depth. And I think for the Saints right now, the fact that they went out to try and sign Charvarius Ward and they were willing to give him a big deal and he goes to the Colts, I think that was them kind of tipping their hand where, hey, if we could get another outside corner, we're going to do it. So it all comes down to medicals. They've taken a chance on Chase Young before, just a year ago. So if they take a chance on Asante Samuel Jr., it wouldn't be as expensive of a deal. And I do like the familiarity with Brandon Staley. So if they like the medicals, I think it'd be a smart move for them, because at least you're knocking everyone kind of down a peg in the order.
Which day 3 pick do you think has the highest upside, just a month removed from being drafted?
Upside, I don't know if, let's say, the player himself is going to be a star, but I look at Danny Stutzman, and I can't help but wonder if he's going to be the pick that Saints fans just fall in love with, because I think you're going to get a relentless motor. He's obviously a tackle machine, but linebacker is like one of those sneaky needs for the Saints where, like, in 2025, it's not going to be the pressing issue for them. But, at some point, Demario Davis is going to retire, and we've seen Zach Bond go out the door. Caden Ellis has gone out the door, and Pete Werner's a fine player. This isn't a knock on Pete Werner, but you're going to need that guy next to him. And every time I watch Danny Stutzman at college, especially when he's going downhill, I feel like this is just a really, really productive player, and one that you're probably going to hear a whole lot of in terms of the pads popping every 2 seconds. So, I look at a player like him. Maybe the upside isn't superstar potential, but can I see him being a really consistent player for this team for a while? I kind of think so. And, even Devin Neal from Kansas, another guy that, you look at the room he's in, I would not be surprised if he gets on the field soon.
Right.
And I don't see a superstar at the next level, because I don't think Devin Neal has that top end speed that a lot of running backs have. But my God, his vision is incredible. And, Kansas football, you don't think of them having, a prolific offense. In the last couple of years, over 1,000 yards, I believe 3 straight seasons it was. He's just a playmaker. So those are 2 guys I'm probably the most excited about. Where their potential lines up, I'm not sure, but those are probably the ones that excite me the most.
Stutzman's definitely going to be a standout player, like you talked about, just a tackle machine. He flies all over the football field, making play after play. Really interested to see what he can do in a Brandon Staley scheme. And that kind of leads me to the next topic with this Saints defense. You bring in Justin Reed in the defensive backfield. They're obviously talking to Asante Samuel Jr. right now. You draft a guy like Danny Stutzman. You draft Jonas Sanker. You draft Vernon Broughton, a defensive lineman from Texas. A good mix of young talent, young unproven talent, and the veteran talent. How do you think that meshes, especially having to learn a new scheme with Brandon Staley, or what you think is going to be the 3-4 scheme?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge. You mentioned Justin Reed. A player like Justin Reed makes me feel a little bit more confident in a player like Jonas Sanker, because he doesn't have to rush his progress now. Like, I know the Saints would love to see him be on the field and make an immediate impact, but you bring in Justin Reed, you have Tyrann Mathieu out there who's learned just about every defense there is in the world. So, you kind of get to be steady. And, Justin Reed's probably the signing where I've seen a lot of, not New Orleans based, because obviously everyone's so, happy to have him back in Louisiana, but, a lot of people saying, is it worth a team that's rebuilding spending on a player at that position? And I look at the Saints last year. That's a defense that really struggled. They weren't that physical. And I think, Justin Reed at the minimum is going to give you that impact player, whether it's stopping the run, whether it's showing good range at safety. So I love that aspect of it. I would say you mentioned having that versatility. I think D-line is going to be the most interesting, because guys like Cam Jordan aren't going to put up big flashy numbers this year. Obviously, they're towards the end of his career. But if he can help out those younger guys, you mentioned Vernon Broughton, can he teach a player like that, who I think does have good versatility? You can move him inside, Yep. You can move him outside. Can you kind of help and speed up their growth? Same goes for Chase Young. I watched Chase Young at the end of last season, and I understand why the Saints paid him. They're hoping they get that guy for a full year. So
Correct.
I believe the Saints have a nice mix of it. We mentioned Stutzman. He goes into linebacker room with Demario Davis. That's going to be a huge key for them. So outside of cornerback, you really do have that blend, and I think that is important, because especially with Staley's defense, it's not just going to be 3-4. He talked about it. He's just kind of going to play to his players' strength. So, on paper, it will probably be a 3-4 scheme, but I would not be surprised if you see a little bit of more of a 4-3 at times too. And he's just going to rotate depending on how it looks. So I'm pretty excited about this group. I definitely have concerns about the defense, but if some of these guys can just come along and make some progress, I feel really good. And I didn't even mention Brian Brzee, he's probably the player that might benefit the most from this switch.
Now, before we get to the Derek Carr saga of this offseason, from February 10th, when they announced Kellen Moore as the head coach, to today, as we're recording this on May 21st, how would you grade this offseason so far for the Saints?
Yeah, look, I would say for the Saints right now, I'd give them, a solid B+. And the reason I'm going to leave it there is because, realistically, they weren't going to be big spenders, and I totally got that. The one thing that concerns me, though, is just I don't think they have enough playmakers offensively right now. Like, if there's one knock on the Saints, is you are unfortunately, a Chris Olave injury away from going yet another year. I don't know who's going to play, make the plays at wide receiver, and that kind of concerns me. Now, Rashid Shaheed's obviously an excellent player in his own right, but there's just not enough depth there. And I guess you kind of have to sacrifice at other spots, and that was the one that takes the hit because you go into this offseason, there's needs everywhere. And
Right.
I think the Saints have done a really good job of elevating their safety room. Offensive line, you just adding Kelvin Banks alone, I feel better about that group, and obviously getting Dylan Radins, and we'll see what happens with Trevor Penning in a new scheme. Maybe he can kind of figure it out. So I think the O-line got better, the safety room got better. I wouldn't say the defensive line got better, but there's at least depth, and hopefully that depth will kind of pan out. You add Vernon Broughton, you bring in Godshaw, so you have a little bit of versatility there, which I like. But yeah, offensively, I don't think there's enough pop there. So I'm going to go B+. But I think overall, though, for an offseason that started off with the Saints missing on Aaron Glenn, not getting a in-person interview with Joe Brady, this could have really spiraled, and I think the Saints actually recovered pretty well.
All right, Chris, let's talk Derek Carr. Gets hurt in New York, breaks his hand, misses the rest of the season. And, you go into the offseason going, okay, looking at the contract, obviously, you're trying to figure out, when the Saints could potentially move on from a cap perspective. Because let's be honest, the Derek Carr experiment did not work out in New Orleans, like some people thought that it might. And then, March comes around and, Derek Carr also has a shoulder injury. Oh, and the Saints knew about it. Okay. Well, how severe is it? Well, time will tell. We have to run some tests, yada, yada, yada. Wow, Derek Carr's retiring. In your opinion, is this one of the oddest things you've seen in the way that it played out, from hand injury to hand and shoulder injury to the shoulder injury so severe he's retiring?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, honestly, Matt, I'm at the point where I don't even think this situation's over yet. Like, if you told me in a year from now Derek Carr wants to play football again, I honestly wouldn't be that surprised. Like, he's still in his mid-30s. It's not like he's at the tail end of his career. So, this situation was one of those where I believe had these two sides just kind of part in February, I don't necessarily don't even know it reaches this point. Like, I do wonder to some degree if Derek Carr, you kind of look at your options, go, well, I can't get traded. And there was reports, that he was kind of looking around to see if there were suitors. And if you go, man, I can't get traded, it's already the middle of May, and you got OTAs starting up, training camps in July. I'm not going to have time right now. The only suitor out there is really Pittsburgh, but it seems like they're kind of married to the idea of Aaron Rodgers. And if he'll go there, you say, all right, well, I don't want to play for the Saints right now, and I'm not that healthy, so you take off. But, the whole situation's fascinating. Like, even the money aspect of it, a lot of Saints fans, and I understand the frustration. We're so angry about the restructure. And whether or not the Saints knew it would pan out this way, obviously they didn't expect it when you restructure for him to retire a couple months later. But now you're getting the $30 million back. Next year's dead cap hit isn't going to be nearly as colossal as it was supposed to be, as opposed to pre-retirement.
Right.
And it really is just a puzzling spot. You felt like Tyler Shuck getting drafted was the end of the Derek Carr era for sure. It really felt like it cemented it. But I thought that he was going to get released. If I'm being honest, I thought the Saints were going to say, you know what, we're kind of getting some goodwill here with a new coach and a new quarterback, and Saints fans are starting to try and get bought in on this new culture. Let's just bite the bullet. Post June 1st, cut Derek Carr. So when I saw that alert come up, I'm just going through a normal shift. I'm looking to see what to write about, and I see his, kind of a picture from Rappaport of Derek Carr, and I thought, oh, did they just cut him, or they're planning on cutting him? And I saw the words retire, and I just couldn't believe it. And I still don't think this, like I said, I still don't think this saga's over. Luckily for the Saints, it is. But I could see Derek Carr playing football again, because even the timeline of everything, I don't know, it just seems like premature. For how do you go from competing and feeling like you're fighting hard, all of a sudden I'm out of the NFL? It happened so quick.
Yeah, a lot of people have had that same thought that, obviously there's a shoulder injury, right? But maybe the severity was a little bit exaggerated to the point where, Derek just wanted to take the year off, not play for the Saints anymore, and unretire in 2026 and sign a contract to play somewhere. I get the point of some people that have said, you got to have a veteran quarterback. Does having a guy like Kellen Moore as your head coach, who played quarterback in the NFL, who knows the position, Doug Nussmeier's your offensive coordinator, played quarterback in the NFL, knows the position. His son's one of the best quarterbacks in the country in college football. Does that experience at the position maybe Mickey Loomis is looking at that and saying, well, maybe we don't need a veteran quarterback because we already have those voices in our coaching staff?
It's definitely possible. I also think, Kellen's perspective is so unique because, when he goes to sit on the bench and talk something out with whoever the starter will be, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's still in his 30s, youngest head coach now in the NFL, and he's been through the process. Obviously, he doesn't have a ton of NFL starts under his belt and snaps, but you're talking about a guy that's been there. I mean, whether it was at Boise State or even in Detroit or Dallas, so he's been around. I think that definitely helps. Now, do I think the Saints are going to keep their quarterback room the way it is right now? Maybe not. I think things can fluctuate, and as you get closer to the season, their opinion might change. But I don't think they even need to make a huge splash. Like I said this a couple of weeks ago, but if the Saints went out there, and this depends if the player's interested because, he's starting to kind of go on the rise when it comes to his coaching tenure. But, if Teddy Bridgewater decides, hey, I don't mind coming back to New Orleans, I actually think that's the perfect vet quarterback to take in because that he loves the culture. He'll be fully embraced there. He has no ego. I mean, you're talking about a guy that is as selfless as it gets. And I look at Washington last year. Quarterback room wasn't loaded, let's say, with star experience, but you had Marcus Mariota, who obviously for his time in Tennessee was a starter, and at this point in his career knows he's not a starter anymore, but you kind of have that guy to lean on if you are Jaden Daniels, and if you don't need it, all the power to you, but maybe a move like that I think is possible, but right now for the Saints, you go through OTAs, see how it is. If you get through OTAs and you feel like, all right, maybe let's get a vet in there for July, there's still options out there. You can do it without getting, an Aaron Rodgers who's going to come in and take all the attention. Obviously, that one's not going to happen. So I still think they'll add a vet quarterback. I really do. I can't see them going into the week one with Jake Haener, Rattler, and Shuck as the three. I could see them just, maybe a vet quarterback gets released elsewhere and they pick him up. But I can understand the thought process of Nussmeier and Kellen Moore and that collaborative group kind of replacing what a vet quarterback could do.
Trade a 5th rounder to the Giants and get Jameis Winston.
Look, it's a popular one, and that kind of falls in the Bridgewater camp for me, Matt. Where I want a guy that I know is not going to cause any problems, and I think Winston definitely fits that.
And also, like you said, a guy that at the point of his career, I think Jameis understands that he's not going to play anymore, right? Yeah. And that's the kind of guy I think the Saints would want to add is a guy that you make it very transparent from the jump. Like, look, you're only going to play if both Shuck and Rattler are hurt and can't play. That's the only way you're going to see the field. Otherwise, you're just a mentor. Now, we're going to pay you handsomely to do it, but you're only a mentor. And I think Jameis Winston just fits that mold perfectly. But Chris, look, I'm about to get animated for a second because this whole Derek Carr situation is really frustrating for me because you have a general manager. Look, let me preface this by saying that Mickey Loomis has done some tremendous things for this New Orleans Saints franchise. Drew Brees and Sean Payton aren't possible without Mickey Loomis. The Super Bowl in 2009 is not possible without Mickey Loomis. This, that, and the other. But I kind of question the last couple of months from his standpoint because Derek Carr gets hurt. The injury saga plays out, right? And Mickey's pretty quiet about it. Actually, everybody in the Saints front office is pretty quiet about it. And then the day before the draft, he holds a pre-draft press conference, and many people are trying to get some insight into Derek Carr, and Mickey shuts it down saying, this is a pre-draft press conference. I only want to talk about the draft, which is fine. That's fair. But then when you speak again after the draft, should be the right time to address those questions, right? Derek Carr retires a week after the draft. Still no word from Mickey Loomis. Monday comes around, 9 days post Derek Carr announcing his retirement. Mickey Loomis is at the Saints Hall of Fame golf tournament. And Fletcher Mackel from WDSU asks him an incredibly fair question about Derek Carr. And I actually have it right here. Take a listen to this.
can we ask about Derek, the situation? Obviously, not that you want to give us every detail, but we haven't talked to you since the retirement announcement, just how it unfolded and you all reaching an amicable agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said everything that we need to say on that.
Mickey, what did you say? What did we, Chris, did we miss a press conference where Mickey addressed Derek Carr's 2 years in New Orleans? Look, again, like I said earlier, I know that Derek Carr's time in New Orleans wasn't, sunshine and rainbows, and he's not some franchise figurehead that fans are going to remember forever. But he is a guy that you signed to a $150 million deal, and it turned out to be a colossal failure. So when that guy retires abruptly due to a severe shoulder injury, I think as the general manager of a team, you should be willing to address that and discuss it and answer the questions that are being asked, especially fair questions, by the members of the media that cover your team. Am I wrong?
Not one bit.
So when did he say all that they need to say?
Look, I don't know what to, I don't know the right way to articulate it without it sounding like Mickey's job should be, on the line. And obviously that's up for everyone's interpretation. But you kind of mentioned, Matt, about, you don't need to have this like farewell press conference because Derek Carr's the, some type of franchise figurehead, because he's not. But, you mentioned the $150 million deal. When you sign a player to that type of contract, like obviously the expectations were through the roof. And I was never expecting Super Bowl with Derek Carr, but I'd be lying to you if when that signing wasn't made, when it was made, if I didn't go, they should go 11-6 with that weak schedule and win the NFC South. That was my initial reaction. Right. And I would have taken it. And I know that's not the goal. The goal is to win Super Bowls, but I would have taken that as a win because, we were under the belief that the Saints struggled the first year with Dennis Allen. The defense was good, but they needed a quarterback. So you get a 2-time Pro Bowl quarterback or 3-time, whatever he is at this point in his career. And, I thought that was supposed to be the difference, especially with their schedule. And you go 9-8 and you say, all right, let's run it back again. Okay. And you run it back again and you start off 2-0 and then you're just an utter train wreck. And, the biggest problem with the Mickey Loomis thing about him not answering it is, had Derek Carr not retired, did the Saints just hand him $40 million and he just wasn't going to play this year? And, that is the question that I have. And, when you restructure deals, Diana Rossini talked about this, but she said, you don't always put guys through physicals. It doesn't, it's not always the case, but you mentioned it. Derek Carr was hurt towards the end of the season. It's not like he was healthy the whole time. So wouldn't the smart thing to do just to check on his health, see where he's at? Instead, you gave him another $10 million guaranteed. You pushed the 30 for this year. You kind of trigger that. And, I mentioned how I like the Saints offseason because I do like the Kellen Moore hire, and I do think they made a lot of savvy picks on paper, and I like the Justin Reed signing. So I think a lot of the things the Saints did were really solid. But what was the plan with Derek Carr? Because you restructured him, then you drafted Tyler Shuck. Had he not retired, going into OTAs, going into training camp, even going into the season, was it going to be a question of when would Derek Carr show up? Would he be a problem? If he shows up, is he the starter? Is he just getting $40 million to kind of watch from the couch? Like, all those questions kind of get nullified by his decision to retire, but it doesn't change the fact that Mickey Loomis made the decisions earlier. And, you even mentioned the press conference before the draft. I'm going to be honest. I was even frustrated when he didn't want to answer there because Derek Carr, the timing of his camp dropping the injury news was right before the draft. So in theory, it kind of did impact the Saints' plans because, Mickey kept telling everyone Derek's the starter. Well, if your starter's hurt, don't you need a quarterback if you don't feel confident in the rest of the room? And, if you don't want to answer it there, fine. But when he retires, to just put out kind of a press release and then act like nothing happened is tough. The Saints fans can rave about it and be happy that Derek Carr's gone because I know that was a really rough time the last 2 years because Derek and the fans, they didn't see eye to eye. But the GM is the spokesman of the team, and it is kind of frustrating that we've reached this point where I don't think we get any substance when Mickey speaks. And it doesn't mean that Mickey can't do his job anymore. It's just really frustrating. Like, you want accountability. You see other teams in the league, when they don't meet their standard, there is that accountability for the Saints. I don't know. I just feel like it's not there right now.
Yeah, you are, as the general manager, you are the face of the front office. You are obligated. I'm going to use the word obligated. You are obligated to speak to the media about what's going on within your franchise. Now, I don't expect you as a journalist, you're a journalist, I don't expect you to give me every inside track. I know there's things that you're not going to tell me. That's fine. I understand that. But like you said, a guy that you're going to pay $150 million, you were going to pay him $40 million to basically sit on the bench this year. When that guy abruptly retires and ends this roller coaster of a month and a half, I think you need to talk about it. And he didn't. A PR statement that he probably didn't even write is just for the fans. It has to feel like a slap in the face, because it's just where's the slightest inkling of transparency between this front office and the fans. Again, you don't have to share everything, but at least give 5 minutes to talk about, even if you fake it. Oh, Derek Carr meant so much to our franchise. We wish his wife and kids nothing but the best. And then take some questions about how did you guys come together on the contract to where both sides benefited? The Saints got the $30 million back. Derek Carr gets to keep his $10 million roster bonus, whatever it may be. Just kind of PR your way through it, right? But at least the fans feel like they got something out of it. I really didn't like the way that was handled. And hopefully that kind of cleans up going forward. Okay, ran over. Let's look at OTAs, and as we get closer and closer into the summer, what are you hoping to see out of not only the rookies, not only Tyler Shuck, but from the team in general? What are you hoping to see through OTAs?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'm really curious to see is a third pass catcher going to step up. I think Olave, if he's healthy, he's going to produce. I think Shaheed's actually a really good fit for Kellen Moore's system. I know he's really big on crosser routes. If you get the ball in Shaheed's hand and give him some space, he could do some damage. I look at that third spot. Like, is Brandon Cooks going to be more of 2023 Brandon Cooks, or is he 2024 Brandon Cooks? And if it's the latter, then all right, maybe you're not getting a productive player there. So does Brandon Cooks step up and kind of validate that deal? I look at a guy like Bub Means, can he take a step? Everyone wants to look at the rookie class. I'm curious to see if some of those guys that are heading into year two, how that shapes out. The O-line, what is going to be the setup? Because, I mentioned before, Fuaga and Banks, at some point, those will be your bookends. But that doesn't necessarily mean those will be your bookends for this year. I would not be surprised, knowing the Saints, how they operate, if they go Fuaga at left tackle, Banks at left guard, McCoy at center, Ruiz at right guard, and Penning at right tackle, and just say, hey, let's just try to play our most talented five for the year. And, they've done it before. They moved Pete when they got him. They moved Ruiz. They just move around tackles and offensive linemen like there's no tomorrow. Yep. So, what does that shuffle look like? They played Banks at left tackle, right tackle, left guard during, the rookie mini camp session. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about the defensive line. Like, I know Chase Young's going to be one of their guys they're going to lean on. Same goes for Carl Granderson and Brian Brzee. But what's going to be that rotation? Who's going to kind of separate themselves? Because I think the Saints have a lot of question marks there. So I'm looking at that. And, the quarterback spot, I know Tyler Shuck, the focus is going to be on him. But I'm curious to see for Spencer Rattler, this doesn't necessarily mean he'll win the job. But I think he needs to show that at least for the months of May, June, and we'll see what happens when training camp rolls in July, but at least the first, this month and the beginning of June when they're going through their sessions, he's got to look like the better quarterback, because he's been in the NFL now for a full season. He has 6 starts under his belt. He's been working really, really hard, and obviously testament to him, but the advantage has to look like it's there now. And if it's not, then I think Shuck could run away with this thing. So, I'm curious to see how Spencer looks and how it goes from there for the quarterback spot. And obviously that's going to be under a huge microscope just because of Tyler Shuck being in the building anyway.
I would love to see on the offensive line, Banks at left tackle, Penning at left guard, McCoy under center, Ruiz at right guard, and then Fuaga at right tackle. And then have Radens be kind of the rotational veteran guy, right? I would love to see that line work out because I think Trevor Penning could have a great career as a guard in the NFL. Because he's just a mauler, right? He's a bully. I don't think he's worked out at tackle. Now, defensive line is another topic that you brought up. I'm really interested to see how they do that with a 3-4 because you've got a lot of talent on that defensive line. Obviously, Brian Bresee, a lot of people have suggested moving Cam Jordan to the inside and being a run stopper now. How do you do that with a 3-4 look? Can Chase Young play kind of that Micah Parsons stand-up edge rusher? Obviously not built the same, but, could he play that similar style position? Brandon Staley and Kellen Moore are going to have to work together and put something together right there because you got a lot of talent and a lot of guys that are going to want to be on the field, and you got to figure out a way to put them all out there. Looking at the schedule, according to ESPN, it's the second easiest schedule in the league behind the San Francisco 49ers. What do you make of it and how it lines up? And, an early prediction on a win total.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, even though second easiest schedule, and then you see the odds, and it's like they're favored for one game, and
right.
You're like, oh, okay, well, Vegas is kind of telling you they're not feeling the Saints. I'd say the start of the season you're going to get tested out of the gate, right? I think Arizona's a team where they're in a make or break year. Like I would not be surprised if Arizona wins like 10 games. I also wouldn't be surprised if they win 7 and all of a sudden they say, okay, we're moving on from the Jonathan Gannon era because it hasn't worked. So that's not an easy game out of the gate, and you kind of get tested that 3-4 scheme against a mobile quarterback in Kyler Murray. San Francisco week 2. I can see San Francisco having to bounce back. I know that they have a lot of guys that left in free agency, but there's still the core pieces are still there, and
they've still got Brock Purdy. They've still got Christian McCaffrey. They still have George Kittle.
And defensively, you got a young quarterback's going to go up against, and I know they have holes there, but Fred and Bosa are still two of the better players in this league. So that's not easy. Seattle's, I think, going to be the fascinating one. I think getting Seattle and Buffalo on the road is actually good to get them out of the way early, especially Buffalo. And even though that one would probably be a rout, but I think the takeaway for me for the Saints is you want to hit your stride, especially with the quarterback. If you're a young quarterback and hit the stride in the middle of the season, I think there's games to be won. There's that stretch where, you play, I believe it's the Panthers, Falcons, Dolphins, Bucks, and I think you get the Jets at some point in there. I'm not saying you go on a huge win streak, but I think if you're trying to get some excitement for next year, because I think it's all about building blocks. I don't view the Saints as a team that's going to be contending this year in any shape. But, if the Saints can win 6 games, and I think that Tyler Shuck made progress and looks like a starter for them, that'd be the huge win. I always go back to last season. I remember the Broncos started off, Bo Nix looked brutal, like really, really brutal the first month of the season. And obviously when you have Sean Payton, things get better, but he finished the year with 29 touchdowns and 12 picks. And I'm not saying Shuck needs to have those numbers, but you're going to take a lot of, especially if he starts the season as the number one guy, you're going to take those bumps and bruises, especially, Cardinals, Niners, Seahawks, Bills to open. But, how do you play in the middle of the season? It's, as far as win total, it's tough for me to predict just because, man, I don't know what they have in coach and I don't know what they have in quarterback, but I kind of feel like you're looking at another 5-12 year. Everyone's saying they're going to be the worst team in the league, and I understand reasons for it. But I also remember last year the season started, and we were all like, man, I don't think the Panthers will win a single game this year. And I'm not saying they had a great year, but they picked 8th, and they actually made progress at the end of the year. So I could see the Saints being in a very, very similar spot. First-year coach, just like the Panthers last year, an unknown at quarterback, and I'm going to go 5-12. I'd love for them to win more games than that, but more importantly, I'd like their quarterback to look like he belongs in the NFL.
Tush push staying around for another year, or would you be in favor of Kellen Moore bringing that over from Philadelphia and running it in New Orleans?
I wouldn't mind. I think the only problem is, would they risk, and I know the Eagles haven't had injuries, so the concerns about injury history doesn't really line up with it, but are they willing to run it with Tyler Shuck given his history? I think that would be the question. But man, he's a 6'5" quarterback who runs a 4.63. So it's like, I would not mind seeing them try it. And obviously, we just talked about the O-line. If you're going to put your 5 best guys out there and say, hey, Eric McCoy, Ruiz, Penning, let's say if he's at left guard, hypothetically, got to push that pile. I'm all for it, but we'll see. I think the Saints voting against banning it actually could be a sign that they're willing to do it, or maybe Kellen Moore was just doing Philly a favor. But, I'm not against it. I just have my doubts they'll do it, at least if Shuck's the quarterback. Who knows? If Taysom Hill's ready to go by September, maybe they'll be the guy they just throw in there to kind of pick up a few yards.
Chris Rosvoglou has been our guest. He is the host of the Straight Up Saints podcast. Chris, before you run, man, tell our listeners where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on. So they can check out the podcast, Straight Up Saints, at Boo Crew Media and Boo Crew Media's YouTube page, and then my written work at thespun.com.
As always, for us, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Link is down below. You can also follow us on social media at We Talk Ball 4. We'll be back next week talking college baseball as we get into the college baseball postseason. We'll talk about LSU and their chances at another national title run, and who are some sleepers in the rest of that bracket around the country. This has been another episode of In the Game.